Good evening. We are now live. Yes, we are. Thank you once again for tuning in to our recurring weekly Edgar Poe class series. It's hosted by Dennis Speed. Um, as usual, I give you a little bit of an introduction and a briefing as to what's been happening this week, this day. You may have noticed that I titled it, "Can we celebrate America?" That's the sort of the stream title here to try and get your attention to click. And what we've been doing here at the Vega for Congress headquarters is we have been aiding our friends over at the Schiller Institute in promoting their conference that they're having in the Memorial Day weekend. But it is all centered. All of our activities right now are centered really in the broader scope around the 250th anniversary of the founding of our country, or the birthday of our country, just to say it a lot simpler. Every single action that we have been taking has been geared around that. And it is actually one of the reasons why we did start the Edgar Pro class series project. As you have been coming onto these classes, you may have noticed that over and over and over again, we make the same point emphatically every week that Edgar Poe was a patriot. He was not just some horror writer, okay? He was a lot more than that. And hopefully today's class will continue to make that clear for you. Now, before we actually go to Dennis, I wanted to just tell you a little recap on today. Today, we had the International Peace Coalition dialogue that happens every Friday at 11 in the morning. And we were joined by Ray McGovern and a surprise guest, Dennis Kucinich, former Congressman Dennis Kucinich, and former presidential candidate Dennis Kucinich. Now, for those of you that also watch the Whiners on Thursdays, which I happen to be a frequent guest on, you may have seen that I had a dialogue with Congressman Kucinich on there. And I had asked them to comment on an encyclical that was released during the time of Kennedy in Pacem Terram. And he, Peace on Earth. And he, said he knew what that was. I read him some of it. And ultimately, he said that the main takeaway of it is it's not about what people in power are going to do. It's not about what the authorities in, the state authorities are going to do. It boils down to two very simple things, and one leads to the other, which is who are we and what are we prepared to do? Because what we're prepared to do and what we do will define who we are. And that fits perfectly into our 250th anniversary theme that we've been developing over the course of the last few months, and something that will only continue to accelerate from here. And so today, Ray McGovern and Dennis Kucinich were on our platform. Helga Zepp-LaRouche was not on today, but Dennis Speed and Dennis Small were able to fill in. And the discussion lasted, a little longer than usual. It went for about 2.5 hours or so. But of course, the first half before the discussion is always available online for you to watch. And if the discussions are something you want to take a part of in the Q&As, you can always sign up and register to get on the Zoom and be able to actually pose questions and be a part of the dialogue there. And so I would just ask you to go back, look at that, and watch the dialogue that ensued on there. It was just perfect. Ray McGovern gave something that people needed to hear right now. And I'm reminded by the Bible quote that's in the Epistle of James, which is that there can be no faith without works. And I think that's exactly right. And that's something that Ray McGovern has been hammering away at for years now. And so he was emphatic that on the IPC calls, there should always be reports of what people are doing. Being briefed is good. We should know what's happening in the world, but people should also be briefed on activities that are happening as well. People being out on tables, corners, events that are coming up, ways to educate people. So with that comes to the conclusion of my little introduction here, and I am now going to bring in Dennis Speed. So, Dennis.
Hi.
Great.
Hey. Yeah, so here's what we're going to do today. We've been taking up a kind of theme just in pieces, not without really taking it up and explaining it. That's been intentional. In the last two sessions, we've circled around the story, the Purloined Letter. It's one of the central stories, maybe the central story, if one could call any story by Poe, or any writing by Poe central. I would actually object to that, but if you were intending to be wrong for the right reasons, you probably could say the Purloined Letter was the center of Poe's writing. Um, but as Jose just said, our real interest in Poe and talking about Poe is by way of solving a problem that has been plaguing America since the assassination of Kennedy. The United States, like any nation, needs an intelligence agency, not for the purpose of killing people. That's not what an intelligence agency is. That's an execution squad. That's a mafia. But the United States needs it because the United States needs to discover who we are, as opposed to what people claim we are, and also as opposed to what people in the last 60 years have been doing, which therefore might assert a certain identity as being the only identity that the United States ever had. Uh, so we are taking up the case of Edgar Poe. We started, first of all, by correcting his name, sort of like doing a Malcolm X. You wouldn't call Malcolm X Malcolm Little, so you shouldn't call Edgar Poe Edgar Allan Poe. He detested that name. He didn't use that name. And we've explained in other classes why that was the case. So from the beginning, right off, the fraud around Edgar Poe has been specific, but it's not around him as a person. It's around the faction of which he was part, which was a faction of American intelligence. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today and get right into that. So just want to set the stage for that. This is the 200th anniversary of an intelligence campaign run around electing John Quincy Adams, President of the United States. John Quincy Adams was the son of John Adams. He was born in 1767, and he became a spy for the American cause roughly at the age of 9 or 10, depending on how you look at that, in Paris, when he was in Paris with his father, John Adams. Spoke several languages. He was our ambassador to Russia. He spoke Russian. He spoke Dutch. He spoke German. He was fluent in Greek and Latin as well, French, other languages. And he became the president of the United States as a result of an intelligence operation, which involved bringing the Marquis de Lafayette back to the United States after his absence of several decades in 1824. So they began a campaign in 1824 that then extended into 1825, and Lafayette visited all of the then extant states of the United States. I believe it was 25 states. During that campaign, they were also able to complete the project of the Erie Canal, which was, if you will, the equivalent of you could call it the Apollo project of that time, but you might want to really refer to it more as the Great Belt and Road project of that time. It was something that British colonialism tried to stop the United States from doing, and the war of the British against the United States involved stopping the expansion of the United States past certain western border around the combination of the Appalachian Mountains, the Allegheny Mountains, and other areas. And the Revolution of 1776 was precipitated by a set of actions taken with the establishment of the British East India Company. It had very little to do with taxes, had very little to do with revolts around small, petty matters or grievances. It wasn't that at all. And in 1824 and 1825, the last really surviving active member of the original revolution, more or less, was the Marquis de Lafayette. Others were still alive. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson would live for another couple of years, but that was what his job was. And so he traveled around. He was in his 60s at that time. Edgar Poe met him at that time and was incorporated during the period of his teens into what is called the Cincinnati Society, or the Society of Cincinnatus. That was the name for the intelligence unit that was formed pretty much in 1783 at the close of the American Revolution. And Marquis de Lafayette was the head of the foreign intelligence section of that unit. Many other people were incorporated into it. Importantly, Fenimore Cooper, James Fenimore Cooper, the writer, and Samuel F.B. Morse, who people know as the inventor of the telegraph or co-inventor of the telegraph, was also a member of that society. Now, what we're going to do is talk a bit here to set up today's reading about the year 1832. This is a year in which both Morse and Cooper are in Paris, along with many other Americans. Sort of a crew went over. And what's not discussed very much is that that group was intending to assist Lafayette in yet another attempt to bring representative government both to France and also to Poland. They were attempting to foment, in that sense, revolution. They were part of a group that went over to do that, and they were also there for other reasons. It has been asserted that Edgar Poe was there at the same time. And we're going to introduce here something that is in dispute, but was in dispute at the point that the author Alan Salisbury, W. Alan Salisbury, who is an author of other writings, particularly about what's called the American system, back in 1980-81, Alan was writing about Edgar Poe at that time. And this document, which is said to be apocryphal, but which is written by the author Alexander Dumas, the author of The Three Musketeers and Count of Monte Cristo and many other books. This is a document that is written by him, attributed to him. So you see there. Following letter written by Alexander Dumas to an Italian police official proves not only that Poe visited France, but also hints at the nature of Poe's visit. So now I'm going to just read the section here. It was about the year 1832. One day, an American presented himself at my house with an introduction from his fellow American, James Fenimore Cooper. Needless to say, I welcomed him with open arms. His name was Edgar Poe. From the outset, I realized that I had to deal with a remarkable man. 2 or 3 remarks which he made upon my furniture, the things I had about me, the way my articles of everyday use were strewn about the room, and on my moral and intellectual characteristics impressed me with their accuracy and truth. On the very first day of our acquaintance, I freely proffered him my friendship and asked for his. He must certainly have entertained for me a sympathy similar to that I felt for him, for held out his hand to me, and the understanding between us was instantaneous and complete. Let's go on here. At my time, my mother's health required that she enjoyed purer air than that afforded by the more central parts of Paris. She was living in the Luxembourg district, while I had a little house all to myself in the Rue de l'Ouest. I offered to let Poe have 2 rooms in this house for the duration of his stay in Paris. Edgar Poe accepted my offer, confessing that his financial resources amounted to little more than 300 francs a month, accruing to him on a credit from Monsieur Lafitte. Only he made his acquaintance, his acceptance conditional on one essential stipulation, which was that in his mode of life, under my roof, he should be free to do entirely as he wished, and to comport himself as if the house were his and not mine. And he goes on, talks about other things here. I'm actually not going to dwell on much else. I just want to establish what Dumas is saying about his presence. And I want to now talk a bit, even though there's an interesting thing here, which we'll come back to when we go back to the Purloined Letter. Let's go to the next section. We're just going to put it up there. No, go past this. I'm going to go past the entirety. Okay, now, well, actually, Jose, go back one. I will make a comment. He talks about how Poe would like the night better than the day. And he says here, and he would light the room in the evening with candles. In the midst of this pale illumination, he worked or read or suffered his thoughts to wander in the insubstantial region of reveries, or else he fell asleep, not being always able to indulge in waking dreams. But as soon as the clock told him darkness had come, he would come in for me and take me out with him if I was there, or go forth alone if I were not. As a general rule, I must confess I was ready, waiting for him for these nocturnal expeditions in his company were a source of veritable pleasure. In these rambles, I could not help remarking with wonder and admiration, though his rich endowment of ideas should have prepared me for it, on the extraordinary facility of analysis exhibited by my friend. He seemed to delight in giving it play and neglected no opportunity to indulge himself in that pleasure. He made no secret of the enjoyment he derived from it, and would remark with a smile of proud satisfaction that for him every man had an open window where his heart was. And as a rule, he accompanied that assertion with an immediate demonstration, which, having me for its object, would leave no doubt in my mind concerning Edgar's power of divination. Now, what's important to understand is that the Americans of that period of the 1830s were an extraordinary group of people. For example, let's just bring up a couple of pictures here. There's Samuel Morse, who was known as the inventor of the telegraph by people, but was also a very accomplished painter. And he was known for a painting that he had done at the Louvre. He remarked at one point that my country is always in my thoughts. My question is, what is it I can do for my country? And one of the things that Morse decided, knowing that Americans could not come to France to a museum like the Louvre, Paris was certainly the preeminent city in the world at the time. He decided that what he would do to not just make his mark as a painter, but also to, in one sense, bring back the masterpieces of Europe to America, is he did a painting that was done at the Louvre. And that painting was basically a capturing of all of the various masterpieces of Europe. And that's the painting, if you can enlarge it a bit. That's Morse there in the center, looking over the shoulder of the young woman. And what you're seeing there, just behind him, is the corridor of the Louvre Museum in Paris. And you're seeing on the walls his creating a kind of idealized display of many of the works that he saw. They weren't all actually in that room as you're seeing it. Because the picture is a little bit small, but to his immediate right, above his head, you'll see the Mona Lisa, for example. No, down a bit more, right there, yeah. And other such works. And what he did was to do copies, accurate copies of these works, and place them in this painting. And then he displayed this painting. It's a very large painting. He displayed it when he returned to America, to the great amazement and also the amazement of people in France at the time he did it. So I'll just feature that one. And then if we could get that picture of Morse where he's there with the telegraph, just so people sort of understand. He worked on this at the same time as he was doing his painting in Paris. And his colleague, Fenimore Cooper, while he was doing that, while Morse was doing that, was doing a kind of intelligence job on Venice, on the Catholic Church, on Freemasonry, and many other things. And he was writing about these things in various novels that he was composing at the time. We're not going to take any time about that. So that's just Morse with the telegraph. So the same person who is the painter is also the so-called scientist, because there was no difference for these individuals in these things. That's also true of the case of Poe. We're not going to discuss that element of Poe's life today, but Poe had become a accomplished military explosive specialist, also a military engineer, out of rather early time, and his that was actually even prior to his appointment at West Point. He was at Fort Henry, I believe it was at that point. So what we want to now go to is the setting of what these people were dealing with. As I mentioned, it was 1832 that the people were in Paris. But 4 years earlier, Fenimore Cooper had written this concerning the problem of the American author being published in America, that Americans found it very difficult to have anything published in America. And here's what he had to say. This is written in 1828. A capital American publisher has assured me that there are not a dozen writers, in this country whose works he should feel confidence in publishing at all, while he reprints hundreds of English books without the least hesitation. The preference is by no means so much owing to any difference in merit as to the fact that when the price of an original author is to be added to the uniform hazard which accompanies all literary speculations, the risk becomes too great. The publisher on this side of the Atlantic has the advantage of seeing the reviews of every book he wishes to print. What is of far more importance, he knows, with the exception of books that he is sure of selling by means of a name, the decision of the English critics before he makes his choice. 9 times in 10, popularity, which is all he looks for, is a sufficient test of general merit. So in other words, it meant that English authors, British critics, to be specific, controlled the writings in America. Now, you may think in my saying that just means, well, that's bad, but why is that significant? Well, what's significant is that the American Revolution, which was only fully completed with the creation of the Constitution in 1789, was therefore only 40 years old at the time that Cooper was writing that. So that would be like talking about 1985 compared to 2025. That would have been when the revolution would have happened. And what he's saying is at that point, 40 years later, there is a complete sort of control, ironclad control over what is written and what is published in America. And what America is doing at that time is trying to struggle to create an independent set of media and remember, there's no radio, television, or anything like that. So that publishing houses and the ability to publish independently is everything, as Benjamin Franklin had already proven at the time of the American Revolution with his printing press operation, which is the way that works like Common Sense and other works were circulated in the colonies. So that the ability to control your publications was the same as controlling the perception of national identity. So we want to show you now what kind of intelligence warfare went on involving this kind of thing. There's the London Quarterly Review, and we're going to reference here an article that appeared in the Quarterly Review that was going after Fenimore Cooper. So this is the London Quarterly Review. It doesn't say London there, but we at the Quarterly Review have a claim on Mr. Cooper as a man of honor, which he has not chosen to meet. In Mr. Cooper's work in England, he made 2 very remarkable assertions. The first was that one of the greatest monsters of the Reign of Terror was the tool of England. The story we pronounced to be an infamous falsehood, and as Mr. Cooper had volunteered to say that he had proof of having had it from Lafayette, we summoned him to produce his preferred proof, his profit proof. He has never done so. The other was that an American of Mr. Cooper's acquaintance distinctly informed him of the fact that Mr. Gifford, the former editor of this review, had admitted to the said American that articles unfavorable to America, low black art abuse, were prepared under the direction of the English government to be inserted in the Quarterly Review. Now, here's what we're dealing with here. The French Revolution, the much vaunted French Revolution, has some famous individuals like Robespierre and Danton and Marat and others who are said to be the great architects of that great radical revolution. And I think it's generally known, anybody here that's so-called political, that today's contemporary radicals, really going back into the 20th century, always contend that the American Revolution is a bourgeois revolution, and the French Revolution, while it's bourgeois, is more revolutionary because it was more radical in its beheading of the king, in the use of the guillotine, in its committee for safety, etc. and that's really the precursor of revolution that is to be preferred. It's the one that Karl Marx talked about, and it's always, and the French often make the mistake of talking about that revolution as being superior to the American Revolution. It was not. It was a mess, and it was largely controlled by British intelligence. And there are a couple of people, both Danton and Marat and Robespierre, are financed by British intelligence. I don't know which one is referred to here, but that is what I believe that Cooper is asserting. And London Quarterly Review is very upset about that. Now, one thing we can do and we need to do is to investigate exactly what Cooper was referring to. That will exist in letters. But this is the letter which is written by William Gaylord Clark to James Watson Webb. Okay, so this is now a letter that Samuel Morse writes to Fenimore Cooper. Now they're both at the point that you're hearing this letter. Both Morse and Fenimore Cooper are in Paris, and they live within a mile of each other. They live very close to the Louvre. They walk there every day, and Morse sets up his paints and all that kind of thing. And Cooper would come over after writing various of his material, and then sit and talk with him. They also both were in regular touch with Lafayette, who was, of course, in Paris as well. So what this is this a letter? This is a letter of Morse the painter, Morse the scientist, which he's writing to Cooper. And he says here, I send you the Evening Post of the 20th instant, being the last shot, and which I fear has sunk the enemy. Everyone I meet says so, at least. Here are 5 days past and no answer. They're talking about a conflict they're starting, and you'll see how this goes. I have sincerely been hoping for one, for I am now confident that the more that the subject is agitated, the more you will be appreciated and your opposers humbled. If the controversy has done no other good, it has at least shown you who they are that have been endeavoring to influence the public mind against you. One is ESG, the Citavant secretary of our Polish committee. This refers to the committee that they had, which was trying to foment revolution in Poland at the time. So he's saying that one of the people going after Cooper is their secretary. And they say, who has proven himself a complete blackguard, think traitor, and as impertinent as the Billingsgate fishwoman. In proof of which, besides the evidence you have in the American, that's another publication, and in the Traveler, that's also a publication, I have 2 impudent letters that the fellow has written to me, signed with his own proper name, and which I keep to show occasionally to my friends, to make them acquainted with the kind and quality of Mr. King's foreign correspondence. So what you're hearing here is about internal warfare, which Morse and others are waging against the faction that is opposed to both the American Revolution and to the projects they have underway in France. This fellow, so what has happened is Morse has gained the confidence of somebody who is actually an agent operating against their interests, but who is in their ranks. This fellow threatens in his last letter to me to send you all that is published against you, and seems to chuckle mightily that he has wounded you and your family. You were little aware what a viper you were cherishing. I mean, in temper. Not that he has any power. He is too contemptible to notice in that way. The coadjutor of the Commercial, that's another publication, is a different person altogether, one whom you would as little suspect as your own brother. It is William Kent. I have learned that since my last piece was written, he is the Paris correspondent of the Commercial. It is not a pretty piece of business. Is it not a pretty piece of business altogether? It should read. A young aristocrat, for I learned that his feelings are aristocratic, who has scarcely been out of New York, gives to the world his sage opinions on foreign politics, and to give them weight, commits the pious fraud of dating them from Paris. Okay. I want to state this before the public and hope that I shall have the chance yet. So what is happening here and what you're reading is the internal day-to-day intelligence warfare that's being waged under the guise of artwork and novelists and so forth by Morse and by Cooper as parts of the Society of the Cincinnatus, which is headed by Lafayette. Now, Poe begins to enter this literary fray. Now, remember, the Poe's born in 1809. So if he were in Paris in 1832, he would have been about 23 years old. And so what we're going to show next is something dated from the 1830s. I don't have the exact date, but it will give you an idea of his venture into the literary battles of the 1830s and 1840s that would preoccupy him for his entire life. And he says here, we know that the British bear us little but ill will. We know that in no case do they utter unbiased opinions of American books. We know that in the few instances in which our writers have been treated with common decency in England, these writers have either paid homage, to English institutions, or have had lurking at the bottom of their hearts a secret principle at war with democracy. We do indeed demand the nationality of self-respect. In letters as in government, we require a declaration of independence. A better thing still would be a declaration of war, and that war should be carried forthwith into Africa. And that last reference means into every corner of the earth. So what he's saying is we need a declaration of literary independence from London, or better yet, a declaration of war. And so Poe, again, is clearly both part of this faction, both from his grandfather being a member of the Society of Cincinnatus, he was the quartermaster for Lafayette during the Revolution, and then being trained and adopted by the faction and willfully, happily serving with that faction. So now what we've done is I've sort of indicated to you something about Poe, Edgar Poe, both in terms of the description supplied by Dumas, and in any case, his affiliation, which can't be denied, with Morse and Cooper, in his work with Morse and Cooper. So the stories that are written, such as the Purloined Letter or the Murders in the Rue Morgue, both of which are set in Paris, or take the Mystery of Marie Roget, which is actually a story about New York, but is set as though it's in Paris. It was about the killing of a woman by the name of Mary Rogers. These are all referred to settings in Paris where he stated that he had gone. There are some other things that are said about this, but just to indicate, some people believe, and I want to point out this because the protagonist in those stories is always called Charles Auguste Dupin. There is a Charles Dupin. His name is not C.A. Dupin, however. This is a book about Charles Dupin and his influence in France. He was a geometer, he was a politician, and was very important in what was the École Polytechnique, the school, military school that had been created during the French Revolution by Lazare Carnot, but was the model for West Point. And West Point, as an institution, was the perpetuation of the American Revolution on the military side. The perpetuation of the, okay, that's the book which discusses him. I don't want to overemphasize Charles Dupin, but I do want to reference this idea of, it's fine to have put it up, thank you for that. But I want to emphasize to you this idea that Poe is part of a faction which is doing something to consolidate the American Revolution against the most powerful imperialist force on the planet. This has to be kept in mind. And remember that that force had also conducted a war against America again in 1812. So when we're talking about 1832, that's 20 years after the British have gone and burned Washington, which is during the period of 18 1816, is it? I think 1814, perhaps. I'm not sure, but it was very recent. It was in memory. So um, it's important to understand that West Point and the idea of West Point and what it was devoted to is not the way that you think about this institution today. You must understand that America is not the powerful nation that you think about today. You could think about America in relationship to England, not even in the way you think about something like China, not really even like you think about something like Russia. You have to sort of think maybe like Brazil to America, that kind of relationship almost, but even more, far more belligerent, because the colonists had beaten the British by using a very advanced intelligence service that had been created by Benjamin Franklin, Washington, John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and Lafayette, and others during and prior to, in the case of Franklin, the American Revolution. It was due to this force that the uh, that ultimately British intelligence was created. What we're going to do tonight, we will keep the Purloined Letter in mind, but we're going to turn to something which is a bit unusual, quite unusual, in fact, but important for the Bronx. And that is the story called Landor's Cottage. Now, just to know something, which I'm going to read you something, um, which is from various things on Wikipedia and the Bronx Historical Society, sort of a compilation. Um, and I am going to be asking you a question as to whether or not you think this is the case. The claim is that the story we're about to read is about Poe's home in the Bronx. There was a big battle to preserve Poe's home. It was the case that the New York Times and others played a role in it, particularly back in 1913. Uh, I think I'll just read a little bit. In 1913, an agreement was reached and the house was relocated to its current site in what is now Poe Park. Of course, the natural setting is long gone. It talks about high rises coming up and so on. It says it is the only surviving residential from Old Fordham and a testament to the preservation not only of Poe's history, but of New York's history. And talks about some other things around this. So the contention is that the story we're about to read is about this location. I am going to ask you as you read it whether you think that's the case. And I don't mean I'm going to ask you to comment right now, because I think that the story may indicate something other than that. And so I think we're probably ready to go to that.
Yeah, before we go to the story, Dennis, your criticism of the French Revolution generated some controversy. I just want to report that we don't have to get into it, but I have one person who angrily, while you were talking about the French, said false, BS, read the history. I am French. This is BS. American Revolution was funded by France. Biased reading of history.
Yes, but the French Revolution was financed by the British. That was my point. The American Revolution was not only financed by the French. This is important because, for example, Lafayette paid for his own ship, his own soldiers, their own uniforms, and came over. Matter of fact, the French went bankrupt financing the American Revolution. They recognized, because the reason for that was because they had just lost the 7 Years' War to the British, which was 1763. So when Franklin showed up in Paris and spoke to Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, what happened was that the French finance minister Vergennes set up a way to finance the American Revolution, which was actually illegal and was set up as a secret intelligence operation. It was set up as a company. And that company was something that was operated by Vergennes and was operated by Beaumarchais. Beaumarchais, who wrote the Marriage of Figaro. Beaumarchais and Vergennes set the company up. It was completely secret, or was kept secret, because the French did not want to openly support the American Revolution. And Lafayette, for example, couldn't even take off from, he couldn't even disembark from France. He had to go to Spain and then disembark from Spain. Charles III, Carlos III also financed the American Revolution. So, yes, the French Revolution was financed by, the American Revolution was completely financed by the French. Others gave money, but I mean, Franklin spent pretty much the entire time of the American Revolution from about 1777 in Paris. That's why the Treaty of Paris was done that way. So that's what I'm saying there. But the French Revolution was something different. It was against the French Revolution that against the American Revolution that the British formed the British Secret Intelligence Service in 1782. Now, they had intelligence services before that. They had military intelligence services. They had intelligence services going all the way back to, the 1500s. Henry VII had an intelligence service. But because of what happened to them in the colonies in America, inclusive of their relationship to Paris, as well as Ben Franklin's relationship to people in London, which is another story because he also had agents in London, including in the family of the Howe brothers, who ran the Army and the Navy. The British set up the Secret Intelligence Service. And the lie has been told since that time that they, through their James Bonds and other such characters, taught the Americans how to run intelligence during the period of the Second World War and after. So that's the story. That's my short response to that. The issue of the French Revolution, however, begins one way, but it ends another way, with 17,000 people being guillotined, among them the entirety of the American faction, virtually. Lafayette himself is imprisoned at that point, and has only gotten out of jail because of the actions of his wife and Washington and Hamilton and some others who managed to get him out after he's put into jail, actually by William Pitt. It's done through other personages in Europe, but it's being done by the British. They're trying to guillotine him as well. His wife's mother was guillotined, and the whole Girondin faction. So just to say, there's more to say about the history of it. It's all important, but that notion of left wing, right wing that we have today comes from the seating arrangements in the French Assembly. And it was this idea of left wing, right wing politics that was the intelligence operation. And that's with the entirety of not the United States, but the entirety of Europe and most of the world to this day. The very belief in left wing and right wing politics comes out as something established by British intelligence.
All right. All right. So I'm not going to respond to any more comments right now because we got to get to the story. I do just want to give a special shout out to some of our regulars and some new people. I won't say who the new people are, but I know there are some high schoolers watching. So thank you for joining. Samantha, thank you for being on. And I just have to do a quick ad read from our sponsors, which is Vega for Congress is hosting a luncheon on May 3rd. And as you can see there, if you'd like to attend the fundraiser, we are raising $50,000 between now and the fundraiser. And we're somewhere about $10,000 to $12,000. So we need another $40,000 to get there. And one of the ways in which you can help us, of course, is getting a ticket, coming to the fundraiser. Also, we have these hats. These are the Legacy 2024 Vega for Congress hats. I don't know if I'll make another round of these hats or not. And maybe we have some shirts lying around. So if you'd like to buy some Legacy 2024 merch before they go out into my closet, please, contact me to get these, and we can work out how to get it to you. All right. So that's enough of thank you, Samantha, saying she wouldn't miss it. or luncheon. Oh no, excuse me. She wouldn't miss this stream, is what she's saying. Not, but hopefully I'm sure she wouldn't miss the luncheon either. So anyway, all right. So that's it. That's it for our sponsored ad read, and let us get started with the story for today. Landers Cottage. Now we didn't get to go over the version of this, but this is the earliest version that I could find,
Hmm.
uh, Dennis. So hopefully there isn't too much disparity.
Yeah, let everybody know what that means. As Jose knows, and others who've been watching this or been part of this class, the versions of the stories are often altered. And one of the reasons for that is so that people don't actually know what Poe wrote. Um, what we try to do, we have various versions. So sometimes what we'll do is to interpolate the different sections so that people are aware of this. So let me just say again, this story, and by the way, the Poe Cottage where it is now is only slightly in a different place. So there are, if you go on the internet, it is searched that this, which we're about to read, is a description of his house in the Bronx. So keep that in mind, those of you who are in the Bronx who may want to go take a look at this area in light of what the story says. Um, I'm going to Jose just start us, but actually, do you want to start us?
However you want to do. Does yours start with "written for the flag of our union" at the top? That's what ours says there.
No. Why don't you do the following? You start us off, okay, and then when you get tired, then I'll go. You go to me, and then we'll pick the whatever the third reader. Probably, let's say Kynan should go next.
Okay,
Just volunteer him, and then list Lynn, and then anybody else there that wants to read.
got it.
Okay, and then as everybody can see, you'll have a text in front of you, so you can read along with us if you want to do it that way. So why don't
Yes.
you start, Jose?
Okay. Written for the flag of our union, Landers Cottage, a pendant to the domain of Arnheim by Edgar A. Poe. During a pedestrian tour last summer through one or two of the river counties of New York, I found myself, as the day declined, somewhat embarrassed about the road I was pursuing. The land undulated very remarkably, and my path for the last hour had wound about and about so confusedly in its effort to keep in the valleys that I no longer knew in what direction lay the sweet village of B, where I had determined to stop for the night. The sun had scarcely shone, strictly speaking, during the day, which nevertheless had been unpleasantly warm. A smoky mist, resembling that of the Indian summer, enveloped all things, and of course added to my uncertainty. Not that I cared much about the matter. If I did not hit upon the village before sunset or even before dark, it was more than possible that a little Dutch farmhouse or something of that kind would soon make its appearance. Although, in fact, the neighborhood, perhaps on account of being more picturesque and fertile, was very sparsely inhabited. At all events, with my knapsack for a pillow and my hound as a sentry, a bivouac, bivouac,
Yeah, bivouac.
a bivouac in the open air was just the thing which would have amused me. I sauntered.
Camping out.
I see. Okay. Okay. I sauntered on, therefore, quite at ease, Ponto taking charge of my gun, until at length, just as I had begun to consider whether the numerous little glades that led hither and thither were intended to be paths at all, I was conducted by one of the most promising of them into an unquestionable carriage track. There could be no mistaking it. The traces of light wheels were evident, and although the tall shrubberies and overgrown undergrowth met overhead, there was no obstruction whatever below, even to the passage of a Virginian mountain wagon, the most aspiring vehicle, I take it, of its kind. The road, however, except in being open through the wood, if wood be not too weighty a name for such an assemblage of light trees, and except in particulars of evident wheel tracks, bore no resemblance to any road I had before seen. The tracks of which I speak were but faintly perceptible, having been impressed upon the firm, yet pleasantly moist surface of what looked more like green Genoese velvet than anything else. It was grass, clearly, but grass such as we seldom see out of England. So short, so thick, So even and so vivid in color, not a single impediment lay in the wheel route, not even a chip or dead twig. The stones that once obstructed the way had been carefully placed, not thrown, along the sides of the lane, so as to define its boundaries at bottom with a kind of half precise, half negligent, and wholly picturesque definition. Clumps of wild flowers grew everywhere, luxuriantly in the interspaces. What to make of all this, of course, I knew not. Here was art, undoubtedly. That did not surprise me. All roads, in the ordinary sense, are works of art. Nor can I say that there was much to wonder at in the mere excess of art manifested. All that seemed to have been done might have been done here, with such natural capabilities as they have it in the books on landscape gardening, with very little labor and expense. No, it was not the amount, but the character of the art which caused me to take a seat on one of the blossomy stones and gaze up and down this fairy like avenue for half an hour or more in bewildered admiration. One thing became more and more evident the longer I gazed. An artist, and one with a most scrupulous eye for form, had superintended all these arrangements. Uh, the greatest care had been taken to preserve a due medium between the neat and graceful on the one hand, and the pittoresque, in the true sense of the Italian term, on the other. There were few straight and no long uninterrupted lines. The same effect of curvature or of color appeared twice, usually, but not oftener, at any one point of view. Everywhere was variety and uniformity. It was a piece of composition in which the most fastidiously critical taste could scarcely have suggested an emendation. All right, Dennis, you want to
And
take over?
yeah, I mean, suggesting an emendation means any improvement or any change.
Yeah.
It seems to be perfect, in other words. You wouldn't add to it. I had turned to the right as I entered this road, and now, arising, I continued in the same direction. The path was so serpentine that at no moment could I trace its course for more than 2 or 3 paces in advance. Its character did not undergo any material change. Presently, the murmur of water fell gently upon my ear, and in a few moments afterwards, as I turned with the road somewhat more abruptly than hitherto, I became aware that a building of some kind lay at the foot of a gentle declivity just before me. Small, not quite valley, but impression. I could see nothing distinctly on account of the mist which occupied all the little valley below. A gentle breeze, however, now arose as the sun was about descending, and while I remained standing on the brow of the slope, the fog gradually became dissipated into wreaths, and so floated from over the scene. As it came fully into view, thus gradually as I describe it, piece by piece, here a tree, there a glimpse of water, and here again the summit of a chimney, I could scarcely help fancying that the whole was one of the ingenious illusions sometimes exhibited under the name of vanishing pictures. By the time, however, that the fog had thoroughly disappeared, the sun had made its way down behind the gentle hills, and thence, as if with a slight chassé to the south, had come again fully into sight, glaring with a purplish luster through a chasm that entered the valley from the west. Suddenly, therefore, as if by the hand of magic, this whole valley and everything in it became brilliantly visible. The first glance, that is, coupe d'oeil, the first glance as the sun slid into the position described, impressed me very much as I have been impressed when a boy by the concluding scene of some well arranged theatrical spectacle or melodrama. Not even the monstrosity of color was wanting, for the sunlight came out through the chasm, tinted all orange and purple, while the vivid green of the grass in the valley was reflected more or less upon all objects, from the curtain of vapor that still hung overhead, as if loth to take its total departure from a scene so enchantingly beautiful. The little vale into which, actually, that's a long paragraph. Let's have somebody else step up.
Okay.
The little vale into which I thus peered down from under the fog canopy could not have been more than 400 yards long, while in breadth it varied from 50 to 150, or perhaps 200. It was most narrow at its northern extremity, opening out as it tended southwardly, but with no very precise regularity. The widest portion was within 80 yards of the southern extreme. The slopes which encompassed the vale could not fairly be called hills, unless at their northern face. Here a precipitous ledge of granite arose to a height of some 90 feet, and, as I have mentioned, the valley at this point was not more than 50 feet wide. But as the visitor proceeded southwardly from the cliff, he found on his right hand and on his left declivities at once less high, less precipitous, and less rocky. All, in a word, sloped and softened to the south, and yet the whole vale was engirdled by eminences, more or less high, except at 2 points. One of these I have already spoken of. It lay considerably to the north of west, and was where the setting sun made its way, as I have before described, into the amphitheater through a cleanly cut natural cleft in the granite embankment. This fissure might have been 10 yards wide at its widest point, so far as the eye could trace it. It seemed to lead up like a natural causeway into the recesses of unexplored mountains and forests. The other opening was directly at the southern end of the vale. Here, generally, the slopes were nothing more than gentle inclinations, extending from east to west about 150 yards. In the middle of this extent was a depression, level with the ordinary floor of the valley. As regards vegetation, as well as in respect to everything else, the scene softened and sloped to the south. To the north, on the craggy precipice, a few paces from the verge, up sprang the magnificent trunks of numerous hickories, black walnuts, and chestnuts, interspersed with occasional oak, and the strong lateral branches thrown out by the walnuts especially spread far over the edge of the cliff. Proceeding southwardly, the explorer saw, at first, the same class of trees, but less and less lofty and Salvatorish in character. Then he saw the gentler elm, succeeded by the sassafras and locusts, these again by the softer linden, redbud, catalpa, and maple, these yet again by still more graceful and more modest varieties. The whole face of the southern declivity was covered with wild shrubbery alone, an occasional silver willow or white poplar excepted. In the bottom of the valley itself, for it must be borne in mind that the vegetation hitherto mentioned grew only on the cliffs or hillsides, were to be seen three insulated trees. One was an elm of fine and exquisite form. It stood guard over the southern gate of the vale. Another was a hickory, much larger than the elm, and altogether a much finer tree, although both were exceedingly beautiful. It seemed to have taken charge of the northwestern entrance, springing from a group of rocks in the very jaws of the ravine, and throwing its graceful body at an angle of nearly 45 degrees far out into the sunshine of the amphitheater. About 30 about 30 yards east of this tree stood, however, the pride of the valley, and beyond all question the most magnificent tree I've ever seen, unless, perhaps, among the cypresses of the Ichia Tucany. It was a triple-stemmed tulip tree, the Liriodendron tulipiferum, one of the natural order of magnolias. Its three trunks separated from the parent at about 3 feet from the soil, and diverging very slightly and gradually, were not more than 4 feet apart at the point where the largest stem shot out into the foliage. This was at an elevation of about 80 feet.
Hmm.
The whole height of the principal division was 120 feet. Nothing can surpass in beauty the form or the glossy, vivid green of the leaves of the tulip tree. In the present instance, they were fully 8 inches wide, but their glory was altogether eclipsed by the gorgeous splendor of the profuse blossoms. Conceive, closely congregated, 1,000,000 of the largest and most resplendent tulips. Only thus can the reader get any idea of the picture I would convey. And then the stately grace of the clean, delicately granulated columnar stems, the largest 4 feet in diameter, at 20 from the ground. The innumerable blossoms, mingling with those of other trees scarcely less beautiful, although infinitely less majestic, filled the valley with more than Arabian perfumes. The general floor of the amphitheater was grass of the same character as that I had found in the road. If anything, more deliciously soft, thick, velvety, and miraculously green. It was hard to conceive how all this beauty had been attained.
Jose, you want to pick that back up again?
Sure. I have spoken of two openings into the vale. From the one to the northwest issued a rivulet, which came, gently murmuring and slightly foaming, down the ravine until it dashed against the group of rocks out of which sprang the insulated hickory. Here, after encircling the tree, it passed on a little to the north of east, leaving the tulip trees some 20 feet to the south and making no decided alteration in its course until it came near the midway between the eastern and western boundaries of the valley. At this point, after a series of sweeps, it turned off at right angles and pursued a generally southern direction, meandering as it went, until it became lost in a small lake of irregular figure, although roughly oval, that lay gleaming near the lower extremity of the vale. This lakelet was, perhaps, 100 years in diameter at its widest part. No crystal could be clearer than its waters. Its bottom, which could be distinctly seen, consisted altogether of pebbles brilliantly white. Its banks of the emerald grass already described, rounded, rather than sloped, off into the clear heaven below. And so clear was this heaven, so perfectly at times did it reflect all objects above it, that where the true bank ended and where the mimic one commenced, it was a point of no little difficulty to determine. Oh. The trout and some other varieties of fish with which this pond seemed to be almost inconveniently crowded had all the appearance of veritable flying fish. It was almost impossible to believe that they were not absolutely suspended in the air. A light birch canoe that lay placidly on the water was reflected in its minutest fibers with a fidelity unsurpassed by the most exquisitely polished mirror. A small island, fairly laughing with flowers in full bloom and affording little more space than just enough for a picturesque little building, seemingly a fowl house, arose from the lake not far from its northern shore, to which it was connected by means of an inconceivably light looking and yet very primitive bridge. It was formed of a single broad and thick plank of the tulip wood. This was 40 feet long and spanned the interval between shore and shore with a slight but very perceptible arch, preventing all oscillation. From the southern extreme of the lake issued a continuation of the rivulet, which, after meandering for perhaps 30 yards, finally passed through the depression already described in the middle of the southern declivity, and tumbling down a sheer precipice of 100 feet, made its devious and unnoticed way to the Hudson. The lake was deep, at some points 30 feet, but the rivulet seldom exceeded 3, while its greatest width was about 8. Its bottom and banks were as those of the pond. If a defect could have been attributed to them in point of picturesqueness, Jesus, I'm gonna skip that. It was that of excessive neatness. The expanse of the green turf was relieved here and there by an occasional showy shrub, such as the hydrangea, or the common snowball, or the aromatic syringa, or, more frequently, by a clump of geraniums blossoming gorgeously in great varieties. These latter grew in pots which were carefully buried in the soil so as to give the plants the appearance of being indigenous. Besides all this, the lawn's velvet was exquisitely spotted with sheep, a considerable flock which roamed about the vale in company with 3 tamed deer, and a vast number of brilliantly plumed ducks. A very large mastiff seems to be in vigilant attendance upon these animals, each and all. Along the eastern and western cliffs, where towards the upper portion of the amphitheater the boundaries were more or less precipitous, grew ivy in great profusion, so that only here and there could even a glimpse of the naked rock be obtained. The northern precipice, in like manner, was almost entirely clothed by grapevines of rare luxuriance, some springing from the soil at the base of the cliff, and others from ledges on its own face.
Let me just ask a question. Does anybody else want to read?
I have one Lynn, but Marcel, you looked kind of.
Sure.
Okay. All right, we got somebody coming up.
Make sure he sees that last section from ledges on its face.
Yeah, right here.
You got that?
We're right here, right?
Yeah, the slight elevation. That's what. Okay.
The slight elevation which formed the lower boundary of this little domain was crowned by a neat stone wall of sufficient height to prevent the escape of the deer. Nothing of the fence kind was observable elsewhere, for nowhere else was an artificial enclosure needed. Any stray sheep, for example, which should attempt to make its way out of the vale by means of the ravine, would find its progress arrested after a few yards' advance by the precipitous ledge of rock over which tumbled the cascade that had arrested my attention as I first drew near the domain. In short, the only ingress or egress was through a grate or gate occupying a rocky pass in the road, a few paces below the point at which I stopped to reconnoiter the scene.
Reconnoiter.
I have described the brook as meandering very irregularly through the whole of its course. Its 2 general directions, as I have said, were first from west to east and then from north to south. At the turn, the stream, sweeping backwards, made an almost circular loop, so as to form a peninsula which was very nearly an island, and which included about the 16th of an acre. On this peninsula stood a dwelling house, and when I say that this house, like the infernal terrace seen by Vathek, I can't speak French, but
That's all right. I'll just read the translation.
Yeah.
Was of an architecture unknown in earthly annals.
Okay.
And well, let's keep on.
Yeah. Okay. I mean merely that its
overall effect
struck me with the keenest sense of combined novelty and propriety. In a word, of poetry. For then, in the words just employed, I could scarcely give, of poetry in the abstract, a more rigorous definition. And I do not mean that merely autre was perceptible in any respect. In fact, nothing could well be more simple, more utterly unpretending than this cottage. Its marvelous effect lay altogether in its artistic arrangement as a picture. I could have fancied, while I looked at it, that some eminent landscape painter had built it with his brush. The point of view from which I first saw the valley was not altogether, although it was nearly the best point from which to survey the house. I will therefore describe it as I afterwards saw it, from a position on the stone wall at the southern extreme of the amphitheater.
You can stop there.
Yeah, I'll stop it. Yeah.
Okay. Did you want to read too? Okay. All right.
have any problem, I'll say just let me know because I can pick it up.
No,
But
we're
we're
good. Yeah, we're at the main building.
The main building was about 24, excuse me. The main building was about 24 feet long and 16 broad, certainly not more. Its total height from the ground to the apex of the roof could not have exceeded 18 feet. To the west end of this structure was attached one about a third smaller in all its proportions, the line of its front standing back about 2 yards from that of the larger house, and the line of its roof, of course, being considerably depressed below that of the roof adjoining. At right angles to these buildings, and small, being in general 1/3 less than the western wing.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. At right angles to these buildings, and from the rear of the main one, not exactly in the middle, extended a third compartment, very small, being in general 1/3 less than the western wing. The roofs of the two larger were very steep, sweeping down from the ridge beam with a long concave curve and extending at least 4 feet beyond the walls in front, so as to form the roofs of two piazzas. These latter roofs, of course, needed no support, but as they had the air of needing it, slight and perfectly plain pillars were inserted at the corners alone. The roof of the northern wing was merely an extension of a portion of the main roof. Between the chief building and the western wing arose a very small and rather slender square chimney of hard Dutch bricks, alternately black and red. A slight cornice of projecting bricks at the top. Over the gables, the roofs also projected very much. In the main building, about 4 feet to the top, over the gables, the roofs also projected very much. In the main building, about 4 feet to the east and 2 to the west. The principal door was not exactly in the main division, being a little to the east, while the two windows were to the west. These latter did not extend to the floor, but were much longer and narrower than usual. They had single shutters, like doors. They had single shutters like doors. The panes were of lozenge form, but quite large. The door itself had its upper half of glass, also in lozenge panes. A single window looked out. A movable shutter secured it to the night. Secured it at night. The door to the west wing was in its gable and quite simple. A single window looked out to the south. There was no external door to the north wing, and it also had only one window to the east. The blank wall of the eastern gable was relieved by stairs with a balustrade running diagonally across it, the ascent being from the south. Under cover of the widely projecting eave, these steps gave access to a door leading to the garret, or rather loft, for it was lighted only by a single window to the north and seemed to have been intended as a storeroom. The piazzas of the main building and the western wing had no floors, as is usual, but the doors at each window, large, flat, irregular slabs of granite lay embedded in the delicious turf, affording comfortable footing in all weather. Excellent paths of the same material, not nicely adapted, but with the velvety sod filling frequent intervals between the stones, led hither and thither from the house to a crystal spring about 5 paces off to the road, or to one or two outhouses that lay to the north beyond the brook and were thoroughly concealed by a few locusts and catalpas. Not more than 6 steps from the main door of the cottage stood the dead trunk of a fantastic pear tree, so clothed from head to foot in the gorgeous begonia blossoms that one required no little scrutiny to determine what manner of the sweet thing it could be. From the various arms of this tree hung cages of different kinds. In one, a large wicker cylinder with a ring on top revealed a mockingbird. In another, an oriole. In the third, an impudent bobolink, while 3 or 4 more delicate prisons were loudly vocal with canaries. Should I just continue?
Yeah, I'll pick it up. The pillars of the piazza were enwreathed in jasmine. And by the way, let's get another reader ready. Okay. Give us a conclusion. It's quite a bit more here. The pillars of the piazza were enwreathed in jasmine and sweet honeysuckle, while from the angle formed by the main structure in its west wing in front sprang a grapevine of unexampled luxuriance. Scorning all restraint, it had clambered first to the lower roof, then to the higher, and along the ridge of this latter it continued to writhe on, throwing out tendrils to the right and left, until at length it fairly attained the east gable and fell trailing over the stairs. The whole house, with its wings, was constructed of the old-fashioned Dutch shingles, broad and with unrounded corners. It is a peculiarity of this material to give houses built of it the appearance of being wider at bottom than at top, after the manner of Egyptian architecture. In the present instance, this exceedingly picturesque effect was aided by numerous pots of gorgeous flowers that almost encompassed the base of the buildings. The shingles were painted a dull gray, and the happiness with which this neutral tint melted into the vivid green of the tulip tree leaves that partially overshadowed the cottage can readily be conceived by an artist. From the position near the stone wall as described, the buildings were seen at great advantage, for the southeastern angle was thrown forward so that the eye took in at once the whole of the 2 fronts, with the picturesque eastern gable, and at the same time obtained just a sufficient glimpse of the northern wing, with parts of a pretty roof to the spring house, and nearly half of a light bridge that spanned the brook in the near vicinity of the main building. I did not remain very long on the brow of the hill, although long enough to make a thorough survey of the scene at my feet. It was clear that I had wandered from the road to the village, and I had thus good traveler's excuse to open the gate before me and inquire my way at all events. So, without more ado, I proceeded. Anybody want to pick up?
Yep.
He's going in.
The road, after passing the gate, seemed to lie upon a natural ledge, sloping gradually down along the face of the northern eastern cliffs. It led me to the foot of the northern precipice, and thence over the bridge, round by the eastern gable to the front door. In this progress, I took notice that no sight of the outhouses could be obtained. As I turned the corner of the gable, the mastiff bounded toward me in a stern silence, but with the eye and the whole air of a tiger. I held him out my hand, however, in token of amity. I have never yet knew the dog who was proof against such an appeal to his courtesy. He not only shut his mouth and wagged his tail, but absolutely offered me his paw, after extending his civilities to Ponto. As no bell was discernible, I rapped with my stick upon the door, which stood half open. Instantly, a figure advanced to the threshold, that of a young woman about 28 years of age, slender, or rather slight, and somewhat above the medium height. As she approached, with a certain modest decision of step, altogether indescribable, I said to myself, surely here I have found the perfection of natural in contradistinction from artificial grace. The second impression which she made on me but by far the more vivid of the two was that of enthusiasm. So intense an expression of romance, perhaps I should call it, or of unworldliness, as that which gleamed upon her deep-set eyes, had never so sunk into my heart of hearts before. I know not how it is, but this peculiar expression of the eye, wreathing itself occasionally into the lips, is the most powerful, if not absolutely the sole spell, which rivets my interest in woman. Romance, provided my readers fully comprehend what I here imply by the word romance and womanliness, seem to me convertible terms. And after all, what man truly loves in a woman is simply her womanhood. The eyes of Annie, I had heard someone from the interior call her Annie, darling, were spiritual gray, her hair a light chestnut. This is all I had time to observe of her. At her most courteous of invitations, I entered, passing first into a tolerably wide vestibule. Having come mainly to observe, I took notice that to my right as I stepped in was a window, such as those in the front of the house. To the left, a door leading into the principal room, while opposite me, an open door enabled me to see a small apartment, just the size of the vestibule, arranged as a study, and having a large bow window looking out to the north. Passing into the parlor, I found myself with Mr. Landor. For this, I afterwards found, was his name. He was civil, even cordial in his manner, and just then I was more intent on observing the arrangements of the dwelling, which had so interested me than the personal appearance of the tenant. The north wing I now saw was a bedchamber. Its door opened into the parlor. West of this door was a single window looking toward the brook. At the west end of the parlor were a fireplace and a door leading into the west wing, probably a kitchen. Nothing could be more rigorously simple than the furniture of the parlor. On the floor was an ingrain carpet of excellent texture, a white ground spotted with small circular green figures. At the windows were curtains of snowy white jaconet muslin. They were tolerably full and hung decisively, perhaps rather than formally, in sharp parallel plaits to the floor, just to the floor. The walls were papered with a French paper of great delicacy, a silver ground, with a faint green cord running zigzag throughout. Its expanse was relieved merely by three of Julien's exquisite lithographs, a trois crayons,
In three colors.
fastened to the walls without frames. One of these drawings was a scene of Oriental luxury, or even voluptuousness. Another was a carnival piece, spirited beyond compare. The third was a Greek female head, a face so divinely beautiful, and yet of an expression so provokingly indeterminate, never before arrested my attention. The more substantial furniture consisted of a round table, a few chairs, including a large rocking chair, and a sofa, or rather a settee. Its material was plain maple painted in a creamy white, slightly interstriped with green, the seat of Cain. The chairs and tables were to match, but the forms of all had evidently been designed by the same brain which planned the grounds. It is impossible to conceive anything more graceful. On the table were a few books, a large square crystal bottle of some novel perfume, a plain round glass, a straw, not solar lamp, with an Italian shade, and a large vase of resplendently blooming flowers. Flowers indeed of gorgeous colors and delicate odor form the sole mere decoration of the apartment. The fireplace was filled with a vase of brilliant geranium. On a triangular shelf in each angle of the room stood a similar vase, varied only by its lovely contents. One or two of the smaller bouquets adorned the mantel, and the late violets clustered about the open windows. It is not the purpose of this paper to do more than give in detail a picture of Mr. Landor's residence as I found it. How he made it what it was and why, with some particulars of Mr. Landor himself, may possibly form the subject of another article. Wow.
Written in June of 1849. Poe did not live to see the end of that year. That's the story.
So you don't have written for the flag of our union in your version, do you? Because I have that on mine.
No, but you have it on yours.
Right. Well, the reason
Go ahead.
well, my initial impression was when I got past because what was happening in my mind was like, is this an allegory? Is this a metaphor for something that I'm missing? But then I just, like, recently I've been exploring more of upstate New York and then just actually enjoying the scenery around there and realizing, like, wait a minute, New York State is actually beautiful. There is real stuff here to appreciate, and it's not something I ever thought I would do living in the city, but and then the other things that came to my mind was it was like I was thinking about Beethoven's Sixth Symphony and how it's often described as program music, that it's supposed to paint like an illustration in your mind about some scene or something. And then I thought about the church paintings, the church paintings that are in the Met, of the large scenes and the sceneries and the landscapes. And I thought that this may be the sort of literary version of the sort of same idea of trying to capture scenery through another medium. So that was just some of the initial impressions I had.
Okay, let's see what other people are thinking, if anything. I do have responses to that, but I'd be interested to see what people think about this.
I have something.
Okay, and just real quick, Leslie, you can come up, yeah.
Please.
So you can give you. But Isaiah says his version stops at "as I found it."
Yeah, mine too.
Oh, and Leslie's does too. It does not have the how he made it and what it was and why. That part is not in some people's versions. But go ahead, Leslie.
Okay, I was trying to figure. I don't know about really what the story's all about. I was trying to figure it out, and was reminded of in the Purloined Letter, the person who was both a poet and a mathematician, because there were a lot of very rounded and sloped and beautiful poetic images of trees and flowers and hillsides, but also with a lot of very exact mathematical measurements, like 18 feet, 16 feet, and so forth and so on. So there was definitely an interplay between that. Then the mention of the Hudson River, I thought might be a reference to the intelligence network itself. And in the end part, there were poetic images, but not mathematical, except for that one mention of triangular at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I had more thoughts. I'm sorry, but does anyone else want to go?
Oh, well,
That's it. Yeah.
there is I don't know, and I haven't read it, but I think we would have to read it, is the domain of Arnheim. And what ours also says at the beginning is that this description is a pendant to the domain of Arnheim, which I suppose he wrote, I don't know, before or after this, and it would give us more of an idea of Mr. Landor and what this is all about. I looked it up. It actually said it was written in or published in March of 1847. So that would have been prior to this. Anyway, I don't know if you want to tell us more about that or if we can read.
Let's get some other comments. Yes, that obviously makes sense since it was mentioned. It says it's a pendant.
Yeah.
So it's obviously comes after, and it has to come after because Poe was dead. So it had to be done before. But that's certainly worth it. Somebody else?
Yeah. I actually had a question because it seems like this is in homage to, what the Hudson River Valley School of painters were trying to do at the time, painting these very beautiful scenes of nature, a lot of them from the Hudson River, and people like Thomas Cole, Frederick Church, who Jose mentioned, I think Albert Bierstadt too were a part of that grouping. But aside from giving this beautiful scenery of the American landscape, I mean, what also was their role, from this intelligence standpoint that you talked about with Morse and others? I was hoping maybe you could talk about that.
I had something sort of related to that too, but if you want to answer that, Dennis, go ahead.
Well, I will simply indicate that certainly is a question that properly would be asked. Like, for example, what is the role of what is the Hudson River School? Why is that so important? Who were they? Why did they have that particular relationship to Germany, to the Dusseldorf crew? Why did people like Albert Bierstadt, who actually had more of a relationship to Hudson than to Dusseldorf? He tried to go to the Dusseldorf school, but actually wasn't admitted there. But if you go to the Metropolitan Museum, for people who are watching online, there are these large paintings. A few people have been mentioned already. Frederick Church was mentioned. Bierstadt was mentioned. Thomas Cole, of course, is very identified with this. And the role of the Hudson itself, which is a river greater than the Rhine River in Germany, and what that represented as a waterway. These are things that one could look into. I could say things about it, but I think it's also as interesting for people to take a look at some of this and see what was developing. If you go into upstate New York now, people talk about things like Woodstock and these places, and they say these are artist colonies. These things are all descended from the days of the Hudson School of Painters. It's also, I think, relevant to consider at least that some contend that what's happening is that Poe is describing his cottage in the Bronx. Now, certainly it doesn't look like that now, but that's what some people have asserted. I myself am not asserting that. But just for example, to answer Lynn's question about the domain of Arnheim, it's also called the Landscape Garden. And I'll just read you the very beginning of that. It actually begins with a poem first. It says, the garden like a lady fair was cut, that lay as if she slumbered in delight, and to the open skies her eyes did shut. The azure fields of heaven were assembled right in a large round set with the flowers of light. The flowers de luce and the round sparks of dew that hung upon their azure leaves did show like twinkling stars that sparkle in the evening blue. And he's called Giles Fletcher is who he's quoting. But now it says the following, and I'll just read the first paragraph. From his cradle to his grave, a gale of prosperity bore my friend Ellison along. Nor do I use the word prosperity in its mere worldly sense. I mean it as synonymous with happiness. The person of whom I speak seemed born for the purpose of foreshadowing the doctrines of Turgot, Priest, Priestley, and Condorcet, of exemplifying by individual instance what has been deemed the chimera of the perfectionists. In the brief existence of Ellison, I fancy that I have seen refuted the dogma that in man's very nature lies some hidden principle, the antagonist of bliss. An anxious examination of his career has given me to understand that in general, from the violation of a few simple laws of humanity arises the wretchedness of mankind. That as a species, we have in our possession the as yet unwrought elements of content, and that even now, in the present darkness and madness of all thought on the great question of the social condition, it is not impossible that man, the individual, under certain unusual and highly fortuitous conditions, may be happy. That's the first paragraph.
Wow, that's great.
So yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I recall the one time you did a tour at the Met, and in the American section, there's a portrait of a man who's sitting with his legs crossed, but he's holding in his hand, and it doesn't appear to be political, right? It just looks like a portrait of a guy, but in his hand, he's holding a tobacco box with the face that's, George Washington's face is engraved in it, right? So on the outset, it doesn't seem political. It just seems like somebody commissioned a painting for them that they wanted to hang up in their house. Now, but then when you pointed out the Washington insignia, or in the painting, right, there's that small detail, right, that doesn't take up the whole subject of the painting at all. Then you also take into context when it was painted and who the person being painted is, right? So I thought about that with this story with Landor's Cottage, because now it's like, well, then who is Landor, first of all? And secondly, he says here in the first paragraph, it was grass, clearly, but grass such as we seldom see out of England, right? It's not a big detail, but it's intentional, right? Why would you say, yeah, this is not like what we see in England at all, or ever? He says seldom, right? So very rarely do we see this ever come out of England, right? So just putting that there says, no, this is political. This is not just what you think it is. There is something more here too. And in some way that I don't obviously understand right now, this is an attack on the British. And this is making a bigger statement about more about the United States than it is an anti-British piece. So,
okay, anybody else? There's several things that we still have to address. Certainly, the business of the Hudson School still very important. But maybe we ought to look back for a minute at just what we read. If there's other comments, please go ahead. But if we look
just here on the internet real quick, it says, I guess Isaiah is quoting from the story, right, where it says something of art, what to make all of this. It was a piece of composition. So I guess he's giving his general that he think, because Poe described the scenery as like a painter with the brush.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. that's exactly what the first thing is I was going to point out from just rereading it. That's the key idea. That's the key idea. And there's something interesting, by the way, Jose. You posed the business concerning Beethoven's what's called the Pastoral Symphony. Actually, suppose you don't think about it as program music. This is something that you actually even it's useful if people have never heard it. Just go listen to the symphony and don't try to imagine that it's painting pictures. And then it becomes even more interesting because if you listen to Beethoven's famous symphonies that people know or may have heard of, maybe you didn't really listen to them, but the Ninth Symphony, the Seventh Symphony, the Fifth Symphony, or the Third Symphony, these are gigantic and are intense. But the Sixth Symphony is not.
Yeah.
There's a very different character to it. And I simply indicate that because the notion of program music, I don't think is what Beethoven is doing there at all. There are people that do it. I don't, and I know why people say it, but I'm not posing that to be contradictory. I'm posing that to say that if this story, you have to ask yourself the question: what is the purpose of these extraordinarily detailed descriptions? Why do that? You can take almost any of them, right? The slopes which encompass the vale could not fairly be called hills unless at their northern face. Here, a precipitous ledge of granite arose to a height of some 90 feet, and as I have mentioned, the valley at this point was not more than 50 feet wide. But as the visitor proceeded southwardly from this cliff, he found on his right hand and on his left declivities at once less high, less precipitous, and less rocky. Now remember, Leslie posed an issue, a question, which is, well, is this picture related in some fashion to the intelligence services? Now, I'm not giving an answer to that, but ask yourself one question. What would have been the role of painters, or what, for a different question? You may or may not know this, but at West Point, it was required to know how to draw.
Well, that makes sense. That makes sense because if you're in the military and you need to be able to explain what you saw, you either had to write it like Poe, which is like, I was also thinking, if I was Lewis and Clark exploring the West, how would I actually bring back what I saw? And you would have to be able to describe it in this depth, but you would also have to be able to draw what you saw too, because sometimes words cannot capture what you saw. So, and just for military purposes too, you would need to know how to draw if you need to get that, hey, it looks like this,
Yes.
So
yes, especially if you're going to assault an objective.
Right.
Yeah. One thing that comes to mind is that the scene and the interior of the house are in quite contrast to the description of the house in the Acid Nation. If people remember that story, the one about Venice, which has all of this stuff in it, and it's I mean, some of the different artifacts may have been beautiful, but it's like too much. And this is, he keeps emphasizing, very, very simple. I mean, this is, and I think all the other stuff that we're saying is interesting, but it's kind of uniquely a American landscape and an American interior. I think quite in contrast to, it's not an oligarchical estate. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and in addition to that, obviously, the external world of the assignation, which is Venice, is ominous, is sinister, and the palace is equally ominous and sinister. whatever, however ornate it may be.
Yeah.
And in this case, what we're talking about is this great profusion and variety. Like, for example, think about the number of trees he goes through. And this whole discussion he has about the 3 different trees that are in the valley, and the extraordinary height and beauty, etc., of the trees. Let me just remark, reflecting on just to give a sense of something. Consider that in the American Revolution, you have people like Charles Wilson Peale, the artist, or John Trumbull, the artist. These guys are military officers with George Washington. Let's just take like John Trumbull. John Trumbull was born in 1756, and he does a sketch of the Declaration of Independence on the back of the $2 bill. But he witnessed the Battle of Bunker Hill, but he became important because he sketched the plans of the British and American lines, which of course indicates that he was also a spy. Okay, so this idea of the relationship of art in various ways to the political struggle of the colonists and those in the American Revolution should be kept in mind. It shouldn't be divorced from our considerations. You want to consider, for example, why would it have been polemical to describe in painting the Hudson Valley? Why would that be a political statement?
Well, because it exists, right? So like it's something that is coming out of this new country that has just been formed with a completely new government and a completely new way of life and thinking and orienting its society and culture. And so the very fact that this is born out of that, it's like we are taking our government and this is what we are focusing on. This is how we are going to define America. This is what America is going to be.
Coming back to the comment that was written concerning art, you want to consider that what's being said here, what to make of all this, of course, I know not. Here was art undoubtedly. That did not surprise me. All roads in the ordinary sense are works of art, nor can I say that there was much to wonder at in the mere excess of art manifested. All that seemed to have been done might have been done here with such natural capabilities as they have it in the books on landscape gardening with very little labor and expense. No, it was not the amount, but the character of the art, which caused me to take a seat on one of the blossomy stones and gaze up and down this fairy-like avenue for half an hour or more in bewildered admiration. What does that mean? The character of the art. Anybody? What might Poe mean? What is it that he's indicating?
I have an idea, but go ahead, Leslie.
Just one little thought is that at the beginning, the character was looking for a place to just lay down and go to sleep for the night.
Right.
And at the end, he said, my purpose in crossing the threshold and going into this cottage was to observe. It's like his imagination was just on fire at that point. He was fascinated.
Yeah, the purpose changed. Right.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that his statement there, no, it was not the amount, but the character of the art, which caused me to take a seat on one of the blossomy stones and gaze up and down this fairy-like avenue for half an hour more in bewildered admiration. I actually thought of an example from Juan de Pareja's paintings, right? Because he has paintings of individuals that he knew personally. and the way he paints them says so much about that person. And it's not flowery or blossomy or anything like that compared to his paintings that are done in an almost Rococo style, where it's like, you know, imagery up the wazoo, all kinds of different icons and symbols and figures are placed, right? And it's a bigger painting, yet the one that's more interesting is the portraits that he did of other people. And so it's what I thought he...
One thing that's clear is that the portrait we are getting in this story is of an idea. You see, you say it's a natural setting, just in the same way as you look at some of these Hudson River School paintings. Well, maybe we should bring them up, not maybe right now, though that might, you know, maybe there's one I'll think of, or somebody else to think of. Some of the Bierstadt settings, for example. But would you have seen the thing that's being described? Is what we're hearing a setting in nature?
I don't want to miss some of the comments on the internet, by the way. This is Samantha reflecting on what she thinks character is, maybe quality or soul of the art.
The soul of the art. Here's an interesting thing. You see, because we have limited senses, we are who we are. We only have a sensorium. There's sort of an interesting question. Can you add to the five senses? This is something that several people take up. My answer is yes. But even if you can add to the senses, they're obviously limited. Even if you add 100 senses to the 6 senses, then you'd have 106.
Yeah.
So is a question. That means you have boundary conditions in which outside of those boundaries, you don't perceive things. It's like the idea that you have empty space. Well, is that really true? And what do you mean by empty? And for example, in any room, as we know, because of Lavoisier, there's oxygen in the room. But before Lavoisier, people may have suspected that the whole universe was filled, but they didn't know in what way. Nor do we exactly now know. You know, there's that famous also experiment that Rutherford did, where he took a piece of gold and pounded it into fineness, and then shot particles at it. And he thought that what he was going to get was all these particles were going to be sort of sitting on this piece of gold. And what happened was that when he tried to identify the position of the particles, he couldn't find them because they'd all gone through the gold, which led him to conclude that there was a vast space in the nucleus of an atom, right, between the different parts. And the rumor was, I don't know if it's really true, that when he got up in the morning after making this discovery, that he was afraid to step onto the ground lest he might fall through.
Lest he might fall through.
That the view that you have, your perception of what you think is solid, is based on your sensorium.
Yeah, that's right. And and even like chemistry diagrams never do a good job at actually scaling like what an atom is, right? Because the current understanding of what an atom is and the size of it is that you have the nucleus, which is composed of the protons and neutrons, right? But you're often told that electrons are like 1,000 times smaller and they orbit the nucleus. But when you look at the diagrams, they don't look all that much smaller. But actually, if you're down at that size, that's like a vast amount of space.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Well, right. But then like what is that? But then this stuff composes matter, right?
Yeah.
And this stuff composes solid things. So
But then this issue of E equaling MC squared then actually makes a different kind of, that is, a different perception can occur in the mind about what all that means. I'm saying this because our notion of nature, that's what I'm trying to get at. So when you are reading a story like this is an idea.
yeah. Yeah.
And the question comes in, what is nature? Is nature different for human beings than the idea of nature? Or is the idea required to have a physical existence? See, do ideas have physical existence? They don't, but they don't have weight. They don't have color. That's, right? They're not, but they somehow have an impact, as we can tell, for example, from the atomic bomb. There is a significance to the formulas which have no weight in the way in which they've been applied to materials that have created such a devastating capability that you could wipe out not merely the human race, but significant portions of nature. So clearly, the idea has a metaphysical existence, that's for sure. But if it's metaphysical, does that mean it's not physical? Or does it simply mean that it's beyond the physical, transcendent of the way we, or is our idea of what is physical itself inadequate to describe what we call nature? And when we talk about human nature, is that essentially all that we can know, even when the human nature is not our body, it's not our physical entity, but it's the thing that we call the external world? Is it possible to have anything other than a subjective notion of nature?
Yeah, I wanted to say something quickly because I know we have to cut soon, but people talk about nature as being natural, and like human beings, which are not part of nature, which of course is an absurdity, because what else will we be part of? But also this idea of mankind being improving nature, making it even more beautiful. And when we years and years ago, when we went to the Tennessee Valley area, Appalachia, and if you've seen these early pictures before the TVA and before Roosevelt's intervention, I mean, this area was devastated. You had, people with a life expectancy of 32 and, really the poorest area in the country. And then you go there now, and when we went there, I guess, I don't know, it was a while ago, 20 years ago, it was, you were absolutely thunderstruck that it was so beautiful. It was like, I don't know, nature personified everything. It really reminds me in many ways of this description. And I wanted to say one last thing. This is an artist who said of Olmsted, he paints with lakes and wooded slopes, with lawns and banks and forest-covered hills, with mountainsides and ocean views. Now, he says this of Friedrich Olmsted, who designed Central Park. And Central Park was designed as the people's park, because in Europe, in England in particular, there's nothing like that. There's just the private gardens of the wealthy. So he wanted to create something that would be absolutely beautiful and far more expansive, but a park which was for the citizens of a republic, and where everybody from every walk of life could come and enjoy it. And there's a famous thing about Central Park, which is that if you walk around every single day in a different pathway for a year, you would never retrace your same steps. But every part that you go to is absolutely beautiful. Now, You know, we don't necessarily think about Central Park, but that was the conception of it. And that was designed just like 18 years after this is, or less, in 1850. But Olmsted, of course, was, you know, working on various things then. So he would have been like 30 when the story is being written. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that sense. Again, a Republican conception of what you do with your environment.
I know we have to go, so let's just say the following. What we ought to put out a thing for people for some of the names we named, like Frederick Law Olmsted. That's a very important person to look up. The origin of the Metropolitan Museum is another thing to look up. Landscape gardening and what Poe means by that. That's very important. The domain of Arnheim. Why don't we make that story, the landscape garden story, available to people for next week? And we'll continue on this discussion about Poe as an intelligence agent as well. But I think probably it's time for us to conclude.
Yeah, let me just run through something here real quick. So we're having people who have never commented before start commenting. I think that's great, first of all, and I welcome all these comments. I want to point this one in particular that's kind of led some discussion in the comments. You know, this guy Rose Isaac says, I think Wittgenstein is needed for this conversation. Are we looking for functional definitions or fundamental definition? I don't think we can say what America fundamentally is, only what it could be. So I don't know if you want to take that up now or what.
Let's do it next week, because we got it. You're talking about Wittgenstein. If you really want to get difficult, you got to go to Husserl. I know what this is. I'm aware of what this is referring to, and yeah, but it's a bigger problem.
All right, good.
Yeah.
This is I didn't think that a story like this in the beginning would generate like what is the great discussion. This is one of the longer streams that we've actually done.
Yeah.
You know, so it's actually
anyway,
people are gonna have to rewatch this one.
Revolution. But the point is, we're trying to make a revolution. I say that to people so it's clear, right? Those people have heard, believe me, and I love the fact that I got challenged on the French thing, and I mean that. I don't mean, because you should not assume that what I'm saying is true, and people have a different conception. That's essential to the whole drive of what we're going to do, because the concept is, we once thought of there was once an American Revolution. What was that? Why is that important to us now? I think the only thing that would be important is not studying it. My thing is, you have to actualize it. It's a situation which each generation has to do for that revolution to be real, and that's not just platitude. Literally, if you don't do that, you get regression, and that's why you have regression and repression and reactionary reaction today, because it hasn't been being done for generations. So you know, we have to find our way to doing that, and in doing that, there will be a variety of thoughts about that. And there have to be disputes about that. Otherwise, there is no revolution.
All right, Rose Isaac, come back next week with your question. Although he did say Husserl goes to Heidegger, not Wittgenstein. That was his response to
Actually, Heidegger goes to Husserl, but that's a whole other thing.
Well, that's more of a reason to come back next week. So
Heidegger's less difficult than Husserl.
All right. Well, hopefully then this person will come back next week and pose it again. All right. So with that, I'm going to wait. Again, we are selling these hats. We are collecting donations for these hats. We are not selling them because we legally cannot sell them. But if you donate and you contact us, and you know, you want one, you know, please reach out, Rose Isaac, if you want also to buy one or a shirt, you know, whatever we have left in our inventory, you're more than welcome to. And of course, our luncheon, we are trying to raise $50,000 between now and May 3rd. We are $40,000 away. We need your help. Come and have good lunch with us in the Bronx, or just support us if you can't fly out. I'll tell you what, be a mensch. If you can give $3,500, which is the legal limit you can give, you can buy maybe 2 plates for somebody. So, you know, and that would be great. Support us in our mission. If you like these Poe readings every week and you're somebody who hasn't commented until today, please consider supporting our program. It allows us to bring this every week. And so with that, I am now going to votevega.nyc to buy your tickets and to contact me about these hats and shirts. And I'm going to end the stream now. So here we go.